Hi, and welcome to our YouTube channel. My name is Ronan. I'm one of the rehab therapists here at Flint House Police Rehabilitation Centre. And today I'm just going to go through a short presentation to discuss some ideas behind the principles of rehabilitation and how you can progress at home or in the gym along your rehab journey. So, the first slide here says rehab is training, training is rehab. So, here at Flint House, on site, we provide rehab classes, we provide one to one gym strength and conditioning programming for around your injuries, as well as education while you're on site. The big thing here is that training with an injury is very common. And a lot of the times that can lead to lack of confidence, not wanting to train, unsure what to do because it might make it worse, for example. So these are common questions that we get here on site. But what we want to do is actually train around the injury, modify our activities, the movements that we're going to do, so that we're still progressing down the line, as well as rehabbing that injury to catch up on from one side to the other. For example, if you have a left leg injury, you might be stronger on the right hand side, but it doesn't mean you don't continue to train, that we're actually going to be working on getting that weaker side to catch up with that other side, for example. Okay. So just looking at the picture here, what we want to know is what is our end goal? So we always want to know where we want to go to, and there's many ways to get there. So that old saying, many roads lead to Rome. There's not one way of doing it. There's no perfect way of doing it. It's all got to be individualized to what your goal is. Okay. The big thing here is there's many methods, but principles are few. Principles have stood the stand of time, and they're the ones that we stick to and use all our times when we're creating our rehab programs, our strength programs, everything long-term rehab. We always go back to our main principles. These are the ones that will always be there. So sticking to the basics. The reason that they're basic is because they work. So we want to make sure that we're always checking back to make sure we're doing the right things at the right time along the journey to get you to your goal. Okay. So what are our goals? Not only is it your goal, but it's also our goals. And that's got to be individualized towards what you want to achieve and what I believe as a professional that I can help you to achieve. And then we both work together to guide our way through it. So the first principle we're going to deal with today is the FIT principle. So an acronym here for frequency, intensity, time, and type. So this is the first thing that I want to look at when I'm speaking to someone about their rehab. When we talk about the FIT principle, we want to be looking at the frequency in which you're going to be able to do your exercises, time you're able to commit, and that's going to guide me on how many times a week we want to be looking at maximizing your rehab. From there, we then have to look at intensities. Now, intensities can change from session to session, from week to week, etc. But it's always something we want to be looking at. Are we pushing hard enough to get an adaptation and a change? Or are we maybe underloading, not allowing for progress to happen? So it's finding that sweet spot in which you can progress, trying to limit the amount of backward steps that we need to take. Then we want to look at the time. So the time in which you can do a session, for example, can you do an hour at a time? If that's not realistic, then we would look at, can we do it multiple times during the day for a shorter time window? And that will give us a really good opportunity to work around schedules around the work, shift patterns, family life, daily living tasks that we need to achieve. And just can we work around to make that rehab fit into your life rather than life being taken over by your rehab? Okay. And then the last one is the type of exercise that we're going to use. Lots of different types of exercise. We want to find something, first of all, that you're going to engage with. So possibly something that you enjoy a little bit more. Or maybe we need to look at things that are more specific to the progression of your injury, in which someone like me can guide you and give you the research, give you the facts in which what type of exercise might help your injury best. And then from that, we're going to come together and put a little bit of a blueprint of a plan for you and your injury. So from that, once we figured out what your program is going to look like, we want to look at how are we going to progress it. So this is the big thing when it comes to rehab. Overload principle is the main thing for progress. So oftentimes with rehab, we just do a few exercises, we get to a certain point, we think we're fixed, and then all of a sudden maybe injuries come back or we don't maintain the consistency of doing them. What we always want to be looking to do is, can we overload? So can we do something that's a little bit difficult, then it becomes a little bit easier, so then we need to increase the difficulty again. Okay, so basically it states that any exercise must become more challenging over the course of a training or rehab program to produce any results. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at here is, how can we progress, make things a little bit more difficult, and what things we want to keep constant throughout that period. So as we spoke about previously, we're going to be very goal specific. We want to look at what we've decided, looking at the fit principle, what your goal is, what you want to get back to, and then try and go from there. We want to obviously look at what activity we're going to do, so the exercise type that we already discussed. We're going to look at the different energy systems. So that could be down into fitness. We've got 3 different systems there. So we got aerobic, anaerobic, and the PCR system. Then we're going to have to look at, are we looking at strength? Are we looking at endurance? Are we looking at different type of things that need to be done within the job, and what energy system? That will also feed into our intensity from our fit principle. Then we want to also look at, have we got any limitations? For example, things we already may have discussed, shift patterns, exercise equipment availability. Are we able to work within the means of a time scale, or do we have to modify it around? So we want to have these considered, like we already spoke about as well in the previous slide. So here's going to be a diagram coming up next, which is going to look at different ways that we can actually progressively overload. And they're quite simple, but this is a really, really interesting one to look at. If you need to pause it when you're maybe coming back looking at this video, maybe pause here and have a look at the different ones. And I'm just going to talk you through them briefly. So for example, we're going to start with a range of motion. So our first one that we want to look at is, can we increase how much distance we travel from start to finish within an exercise? So we're going to use a really, really simple example here, is a squat. So due to the fact that you might have an injury in the lower body, you might be limited in the amount of depth that you can get in a squat. So we might limit it, getting you to squat to a box, to a chair, etc., because we know that that's challenging enough for you at the moment, and any further kind of might elicit some symptoms or pain or something like this. So we can limit the range of motion. But as we try to progressively overload, we can increase that range of motion, removing the box and just trying to get lower and lower and lower into a squat. So that's the first way of progressively overloading. Really, really simple, not changing anything else. Next one, we're going to look at technique progressions. So as you can see in the picture, we've got someone doing a goblet squat, a really, really basic one coming on from a range of motion discussion. What we're going to be doing here is increasing the technical ability of the exercise. And we have a series of videos on our YouTube channel going through different movement patterns and how you can technically progress them. For example, let's use in the squat, we have a counterbalance squat, a goblet squat. Then if we're getting into a little bit more weights, we can start to use dumbbells. Then we're pushing into our front rack squat, our back squat, these type of movement patterns that become a little bit more difficult. And that's enough of an overload to become progressive overload. Our third one is our volume increases. So this is just really, really simple ways of looking at it. So can we increase the number of sets over a week to week basis, keeping the weight the same? Maybe we might want to increase or decrease the reps based on what our goals are, and the loads. So how much weight, for example, if we're looking at strength. So if we are going to increase the load, then that might have an effect on the reps we achieve, and then the sets might start low and then progressively increasing as the weeks go. So that's a way of seeing how we can progress. That's normally the one that we would go to first for basics. Then we're looking at the number of exercises per session. So for example, if you're going to do a really, really basic rehab session to begin with, you can start with 1 to 2 exercises, having our rests, having our sets, having our reps, having our loads already increased there. So what we want to do now is, can we just start to add more exercises to each session, which will then obviously increase overall work over a week. So that's another really simple way of overloading your rehab. Our next one down in the bottom left-hand corner is our tempo and rest alterations. So using rest as a really simple way to begin, you could do a rehab session. And what you might do is you might have 2 minutes rest between each set. So that's giving you a lot of time to recover, getting yourself so that you're form, so you're not overly fatigued when you're doing the reps. And that's going to be a good way. You could decrease that time to lead to an overload. So we might drop that rest down to 90 seconds to 60 seconds, or in a circuit-based setting, you might not have any rest. And that could be a simple way of progressively overloading without needing to change a whole lot. That other part of this is tempo. So how slow you do go through the movement. So for example, let's go back to our squat. If we're looking at a squat on the lowering phase, we might just go 1 second down, 1 second up at a nice, basic, simple tempo. But if we want to overload it to get a different adaptation, we might actually slow down the lowering phase to a 3-second lowering phase, 1 second pause at the bottom, and then 1 second to stand up. So you're already increasing the time during each repetition. This is another really good way of progressively overloading and developing control in all your movements. If we're looking at our training density, this is the total work done in a session. So for example, that's where we would multiply the amount of sets, the amount of rest, the amount of reps that we're doing, and that will give us a density score. So what we might do over a number of weeks is actually increase that using number of exercises, increasing your reps, sets, and loads, and multiply it to get a total training density. So that's a good means of monitoring, are you progressing? And the last one is our training frequency. So that's, again, how many times you're going to do it within a week, how many times you're going to do it within a day, for example. And that is always feeding back to our FIT principle. So they both interact with each other really, really nicely to see that we're progressing. Now we want to get into a little bit more specifics to our rehab. So looking at this diagram here, this is what we look at for the correct rep load for the adaptation that we're looking for. So we're going to be looking at strength, power, hypertrophy, and muscle endurance on line 1 to 4. So there is a lot of research to show that using a certain number of reps under a certain number of load will give you the adaptation that we want. So for example, strength, we're going to be looking at in where is the strength is in bold black writing around with the gold color behind it. That's kind of the sweet spot to execute what we want to get strength. So as you can see, it's less than 2 reps all the way to about 5 to 6 repetitions. So that's quite a low number of reps, but to correspond with that, the load or the weight that you will be moving in this exercise will be a lot higher. And as you go further down the scale, you will still gain strength, but as you can see, it starts to dwindle the higher the reps you go, based on the fact that if you can do 20 repetitions, then the load is probably not that heavy. Then we're going to look at power. So there is an asterisk here with the power. It's still a low number of repetitions to be able to develop power, muscle power, movement power, but the load will actually be a little bit light, a good bit lighter, but the lighter load, you're going to move it with a higher speed or a higher amount of velocity. So that's where we're generating a little bit more specificity when we're looking at power. Third one down, hypertrophy, which is a fancy word for just muscle growth. Research is saying between around that 6 to 12 mark is kind of the sweet spot for hypertrophy. And again, it dwindles if you don't do enough there in the green, but also as you move down towards the right, it starts to dwindle as well. And then finally, we're looking at muscular endurance. So muscular endurance is where we're able to do a higher number of repetitions probably under a lower load. And that's going to get you that sweet spot between 12 to 20 plus repetitions on muscle endurance. When we know what we're trying to rehab, when we know what we're trying to achieve, we can use this to create the specificity of which we're doing it. If you're going to be doing a high load, the rep range would want to be a high effort. So if we're looking for strength, the effort should be really, really difficult from 0 to 6 repetitions. Power, same, and then working our way down. And the RPE is our rate of perceived exertion. 0 to 10. 10 should always be like you could do absolutely no more repetitions and work your way back from there. Cool. So that's all of our principles looking at rehab. And now we're going to go and try and put it all together and help you either put together a circuit class, be able to put together a gym program for yourself, and then can we make sure that we're hitting all the boxes of a full training program as well. So here's a little bit of a slide here to look at the family tree of exercise prescription. So this is what I would look at when I'm about to give a rehab program. Can I tick all the boxes that are on this slide to make sure that everything is being covered in a full body means for exercise programming? Okay, so you can look at this where you can look at it to build a rehab circuit if you're returning to the gym, or if you're having some structured strength and conditioning. This can be a good way of looking at a broad view of all the exercises. We can also look at this from a form of body weight exercises all the way up to a fully kitted out gym, depending on what the equipment is. And this is where we're going to put the pieces to the puzzle together. So looking at the exercise, our primary movements on here as our firstly is our lower body movement. So we've got a squat movement, we've got a hinge movement, we've got a lunge movement, and a horizontal push of the lower body. Then below it, we've got our upper body movements, which is our horizontal push, horizontal pull, vertical push, and vertical pull. On the side, we'd also have a little bit of loaded carrying, a little bit of core stability, strength work, and obviously fitness and conditioning is really important there as well. So I'm just going to go through each of those really, really briefly to give you some ideas on how to progress your exercises in terms of difficulty. So if you look at our squat here, is what we would call a lower body vertical push. We can work from the top down. So a body weight squat, like I said earlier, you can go to a box and then you can decrease the height of the box to make it a little bit more difficult. Then we can go into a counterbalance squat, progressing into a goblet squat using a dumbbell or a kettlebell, as you can see here on the picture on the right, as well moving into a barbell front squat, back squat. We can then modify those to create a unilateral version, looking at a step up or a step down, single leg get-ups, some body weight shrimp squats, or the very, very difficult version of the pistol squat. We can also look down at the bottom right-hand corner, which would be our leg press. Leg press would probably fit into this squat movement pattern due to the fact that it mimics the squat movement. Then we're looking at hip hinge. So hip hinge is a lower body pull, mainly targeting the posterior chain or the back of the body. So we can work from a body weight hip hinge using some drills. These are also seen on our YouTube channel. We've got good mornings, band pull throughs, kettlebell Romanian deadlifts, or a dumbbell. As you can see, that's in the picture here on the right. Using more equipment such as a trap bar or a hex bar deadlift. Moving on to our barbell deadlift, depending on the height, we can go from a high pull, medium pull, or a low pull, or being able to complete a full range of motion deadlift if that is specific for your needs. We can also do single leg version there as well. Lunge movements. So this is a unilateral movement going in all directions. So we've got static lunge or a split squat going up and down into a reverse lunge, forward lunge if you want to progress a little bit more, walking lunge, or a Bulgarian split squat. So those are another variation that can be done there. Also in this movement, we don't always have to go in the frontal direction. We can also go side lunges, which will bring in a different challenge to the movement. Looking at our hip thrust, which is a lower body horizontal movement, as you see in the picture on the right. This is a loaded bridge movement using a barbell. So we can start with the easier version, which is our glute bridge, which is 2 feet on the floor, lifting our hips off the floor. Foot elevated, shoulder elevated, into a weighted bridge, and then into the variation you see here in the picture, the barbell hip thrust. All those variations can also be done single leg, following the pattern of the exercise list above. Now we're going to move into our upper body movements. Really traditional horizontal push. Really, really simple movement, working the upper body to push away from your center of mass. So we've got our body weight push-up variations. These can also be seen on our YouTube channel. You've got a single arm dumbbell or kettlebell bench press, different hand positions, for example, alternating dumbbell bench press, floor press if you don't have access to a bench, and then finally onto the barbell bench press, as you can see here in the picture. Then we want to look at our vertical push, so pushing up overhead. Single arm, neutral shoulder press, something similar to the picture below. You can change the different grips. Change a different challenge using an Arnold press with a bit of rotation. We've got shoulder front raises, side raises, scaption raises. We can use different bits of equipment, such as a landmine, which is using a barbell fixed at one point, and then moving on to a barbell overhead press. And down on the right, there's different variations there that can be done to challenge and change the exercise. Then we have our horizontal pull. So these are the exercises where we're pulling away from our body back towards a center of mass in a horizontal direction. So single arm band pulls, cable rows that you would see in the gym, body weight TRX rows, inverted rows, any rowing exercise using a single arm, using a bench, or if we're in standing, some bench supported incline rows, a bench pull, a bent over row, or which is there where you can see on the right. Then we're moving on to our vertical pull. So pulling from an overhead position. Okay. It's a really simple exercise that can be utilized, but is also quite very, very difficult. So what we're looking at is a lat pull down. You can do a single arm or double arm. If you don't have access to a lat pull down, using some bands, for example, might be a good alternative. Then we're going into full body weight chin ups. We've also got videos on our YouTube to describe little variations to make that one easier. We've got our pull-ups and an upright row or a high pull. So there we have it in terms of our exercises, really, really quick and brief. If you want to, you can pause at each of the slides and maybe make some notes if you're unsure what those exercises are. So finally, we're looking at program design. For us is an art form. What we want to do is we're having a lot of moving parts. We're trying to put it all together like a complicated jigsaw. But the most important thing is to remember that it's the basics that work. The basic principles are the principles that have stuck around for the test of time. So what we're going to have a look at as well is what does the risk outweigh the reward? So is there a different type of training or a bit of an exercise or a variation that we're going to use that will get us a high reward for low risk, or is it too risky and might lead to injury? So these things need to be considered, and you should always speak to a professional if you're unsure. And finally, using the KISS principle, my favorite principle: keep it simple, stupid, or keep it stupidly simple. Because if you keep it simple, you're going to be going down the right track as long as you're progressively overloading in the right fashion. Last piece we want to deal with is monitoring your pain and load response during this training around your injury. So if you're experiencing pain during exercise, that is not something you need to be overly worried about. And hopefully this explanation will put your mind at ease as to whether you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. So we're going to use a scale of 0 to 10 here. When we're looking at 0, there's no pain. And then if we're looking at 10, it's the worst pain imaginable. What you could be imagining is that you need to call an ambulance because you need to go to hospital. This is excruciatingly pain. So when you put that into context, we can use this scale and see how we can actually manage reasonable amounts of pain and discomfort. And this has been adapted for Tomei and Sibernagel from 97 and 2007. And the references are here if you need them. So what we're going to do is looking at the safe zone. So in the green zone, if we're doing an exercise session, a rehab session, and we're just feeling pain or discomfort from a 0 to 3, then that's in the safe zone. Probably doesn't really wind up your injury too much. But what we can see is we're not really going to get much of an adaptation. That's where progress doesn't happen. That's where the overload principle would fit in. If we're not hitting the overload principle, then we're not going to see any change. What we want to be looking at is, can we find the sweet spot in that acceptable 4 to 5 out of 10? And what we want to do is, this may be during or it might be after exercise. If we're hitting that and we're progressively going through our rehab in those kind of zones, then we're in a good place. Now, if we excessively go into discomfort or pain, like the 6 to 10 red box, then we might need to relook at how our intensity was during this program. So for example, we always look at the 24 to 48 hours post-exercise. So if you do a session, 24 hours later, if your pain or discomfort has not decreased or potentially has got worse, then potentially you were in the excessive form when you were doing the exercises. So what I would say is take an extra 24 hours rest and try and dial back the next time. So you just overreached slightly. So we were in here. And then hopefully when you'll have learned that, you'll just go back into this zone and progress down the line along your rehab journey. Pain should settle quickly after the exercise, and you shouldn't have any increase in symptoms. Potentially, you will have early morning stiffness the next day. Okay, so you'll be able to look back to this reference point and say, am I hitting this? Have I been in here previously and that's why I'm not getting any better? Because we want to have a little bit of response to pain and discomfort because we know that's where the changes are happening. And finally, don't be that guy. Don't do something that's going to put you at risk. For example, on some exercises all over the web, will show you showing off type of exercises. These are not going to help you along your rehab journey. And thank you very much for listening. If you would like to put any questions in the comments, then place them below and we will get to them as and when we see them. As well as please share and like our YouTube channel if you haven't already. You can also send us messages on our socials. So there is our Instagram and our Twitter accounts if you'd like to send the messages through there, and follow us on those as well. Thank you very much.